Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a UK political update where I'm going to talk hopefully pretty quickly about the Conservative Party conference that's just taken place and trying to give you, if you're not in the UK, a sense of what's going on in the UK and I think how similar it is actually to United States. I think there are really similar things going on around the world with regard to the rise of right-wing populism and how that is playing out with our Conservative Party, the oldest political party in the world that was, the stalwart of British politics. They appear to be getting utterly battered. And you could say that this is similar to the Reagan Republican Party getting utterly battered and not really existing anymore in light of Trumpian MAGA populism that has subsumed it and taken its place. I really think this is happening in the UK. So the Conservatives had their conference and it was very underwhelming. It was very poorly attended. There were all sorts of jokes. Well, not sort of jokes. Lots of observations about how many of the speeches were just simply not attended at all. Well, half full at best. I was listening to Tom Harwood, who said that, asked to describe the conference, he said thin. And it was a real letdown. There are some typical conservative positions being adopted. Some are actually, well, most of them, though, are really more extreme than they previously would have been. And that's really the point. I'll talk about that in a second. Well, actually, no, that's probably a good segue into looking at the polls and understanding where the Conservatives are at the moment. I have talked about this a number of times previously. So if we look at the polls at the moment here, this is a poll of polls from Politico. We have Reform have sort of come from nowhere over the last, well, I say nowhere. They have adopted the Brexit Party that adopted UKIP. That was the Evolution United Kingdom Independence Party that was your Brexit Leave party. Then Brexit happened, so they had to become the Brexit Party, which is trying to enforce a decent Brexit for the country. In the end, we had a kind of worst case scenario Brexit, I think. No agreement with the EU, and with just a hard leave. And that has meant that we've been economically in a lot of trouble. But anyway, that the Brexit Party then went on to become Reform UK. So then Reform UK have just been rising and rising, as you can see here, starting a year ago in sort of 19%, in third place behind the Conservatives. Labour got in and they have been declining in the polls alongside the Conservatives. Both parties now really suffering, and Reform are flying high on 31%. Why that's important? Because it pretty much defines what the Conservative Party does now and is doing. So the Tories have to, and sorry to repeat myself, but they've got this dilemma whereby if they adopt their old school centre-right moderate conservatism a la Reagan Republicanism, then they lose many of the right to reform. And if they adopt Reform's position, then they lose what were called the One Nation Tories to the Lib Dems, possibly. At the same time, you've got the left starting to mobilise with regard to the Green Party, taking from Labour's left, and you've got the Lib Dems trying to soak up discontent from centrists, from Tories, and from Labour. So it's going to be a very interesting election in 4 years' time. I mean, if the election was tomorrow, it'd be fascinating. I mean, you could even build up a case that Conservatives might get together with Labour to actually try and work out a joint strategy in tackling Reform. I don't think that's likely to happen, because I think the Conservative strategy is going to be to try and out-reform Reform. I really think that's what's going to happen, and you're probably going to see a merge of some sort or another. Now that will really hurt the traditionalists who would like to see the Conservative Party be still maintain its moniker and its position in British political history. But I don't know. I just think the Conservative Party at the moment is struggling for its existence. Okay, so what happened at the conference? Well, as you can imagine, it was essentially a fight to use... Oh, yeah, but sorry, before I get there, actually, Something else that's happened today is that some 20 councillors, just like you can see here, 20 councillors have defected from local councils, maybe even more now, from local councils around the UK, from Conservatives to Reform. So and I think that's really reflective of what's going on. I think you're going to see, probably as a result of that conference being okay for, say, Robert Jenrick, and we'll come to that in a second, it was a bit of a damp squib, I think, all things considered. And I think you might get some big name Conservatives defecting to Reform, because I think people are going to be considering their own political future. This is where politics isn't about ideology. It's not about what you really believe. It's about, how do you keep a job? How do you stay in power? How do you stay as an MP? Conservative MPs are going to be worried now that come an election 4 years' time, they'll be on the wrong side of history. So you get, honestly, I think it's going to be a moment of people jumping ship. If you're starting to see this in significant ways, like a single day of over 20 councillors defecting around the UK, you're going to see that with members of parliament as well. That's my prediction. Okay, so it very much was a flag waving, virtue signalling affair. I mean, we saw this at the Labour conference as well, where flags were given to everyone. But I don't think you saw it outside the conference so much as you are seeing it here. And these are all like dignitaries of the Conservative Party. That's Priti Patel there. You've got as well, Kemi Badenoch. This is, I presume, inside the same pub. So you have flag waving is all over the shop. It's just, I think, the way it is at the moment. Flags are so divisive. We've had this controversy that is not a controversy of former England footballer Gary Neville coming out saying, look, flags are really divisive at the moment, lots of angry white men, etc., etc. Everything he said, by the way, I fully think is absolutely sound, but he's being absolutely ripped apart by this very vicious, almost MAGA type sentiment that is honestly ripping through the country at the moment, whereby we are becoming polarized, and there is this populist right that are snowflakes, essentially. As soon as they get slightly criticized, they go absolutely nuts and say how horrific it is and blah blah blah, and there's this just massive pile-on. I mean, my goodness, what they used to complain, these people, about how Twitter was full of these people that shouted blah 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 blah, and you're like, my goodness, look at yourselves now, guys. You're so sensitive at the slightest bit of criticism, and then you just try and attack people by shoving flags down their throats. It's just pretty incredible. So yeah, I just think, goodness me, the people that used to accuse others of being snowflakes are themselves snowflakes. Anyway, you get here, we have I forget a name. Anyway, one of the Conservatives here, fully dressing up in a union flag. So yeah, that's where we're at. A lot of virtue signalling, and I think you're going to see that a lot. Now, what you have going on with the Conservative conference is this fight over the future of the Conservative Party and the leadership of the Conservative Party. So you have Kemi Badenoch, who is someone who was voted in. Interesting as a black woman. It shouldn't be interesting, but it is, I think, an interesting phenomenon as a black woman in charge of the Conservative Party, given that you have to get the membership vote after you get parliamentary votes. Basically, there's a two-stage process to it, if I remember correctly. So I would have put my money on Robert Jenrick getting the leadership initially, but he didn't, and Kemi Badenoch did. And there's been this fight as I've mentioned, the direction of the Conservative Party. Does it go towards the centre or does it go towards the right? And actually, both Kemi Badenoch and Robert Jenrick want to take the party to the right. They want to be Reform. You beat Reform by being Reform, or out-reforming Reform, or merging with Reform. And so she has been very anti-immigration and wants to bring the announcements for the conference. Were wanting to come out of the European, the ECHR, European Convention on Human Rights, wants to come out of any pledges to net zero and protecting the environment. So you've had lots of old school conservatives like Michael Heseltine, if you know of him, Thatcherite, old school, like literally in Thatcher's government, old school conservative, banging on about how it's all about taking the Conservative Party in the wrong direction, being anti-Europe, being anti-environment. You got Tobias Ellwood coming out and being pretty critical as a former Bournemouth, Christchurch, I think it is Bournemouth, member of Parliament, fairly sensible Conservative, coming out and criticising the sort of, I think, the direction that they're going in, which is a very populist direction, right? So you've got Kemi Badenoch saying we're going to deport 150,000 people. We're not really giving any detail about where you're going to take them, how you're going to make that work. It's very easy to say, oh, we're going to deport 150,000 people a year. Okay, give us the details. Where's the funding going to come from? Where are you sending them? What are you going to do? And then, of course, typically we're going to slice up the government. So there's a lot of looking at the US, looking at Trump and saying, oh, I think we can kind of import that, do a bit of Doge, cut the government, slice everything up, which is, a fairly conservative thing to do, which is smaller governments, etc., less welfare. She wants to, cut back the welfare, cut down civil servants, and so on and so forth. Step out of net zero. All of the sorts of things that you see Donald Trump doing, they're going to do a version of that, and it doesn't particularly surprise me. But they are going pretty hard on it. So you've got Kemi Badenoch saying all that, and then you've got Robert Jenrick, who is still at the Conservative Party conference, but he is clearly, I think, trying to position himself to become leader, because Kemi Badenoch is not popular, and she has not done a very good job with steering the Conservative Party. Very difficult job, it has to be said, of trying to steer the Conservative Party into a meaningful opposition position, given that reform has really got the wind behind its sails, and you've got a Labour government. So the Conservatives were absolutely eviscerated in the last election, and she's trying to, I guess, pick up the pieces, but she's not really doing a good enough job of that. And then Robert Jenrick is there saying, well, I wasn't voted as leader, but I want to be, clearly someone to take the party in this right-wing populist direction, like a reform direction. And Kemi Badenoch came out just this week and said, well, Robert Jenrick is just essentially, he's a poor copy of me. He just wants to regurgitate all my ideas, where people are saying, well, actually, she's kind of doing that of him. And they seem to be peas of the pod. But I think in terms of PR, Kemi Badenoch has probably had her day. I don't think she's going to be able to maintain leadership of the Conservative Party. So I think she's basically dead and buried. And here's a good example. So this is Nick Ferrari, who is, should be a very aligned radio presenter, should I say, to the Conservative Party, here giving Kemi Badenoch a bit of a hard time, and she's falling apart.
£8 billion worth of cuts to the civil service. How many jobs would go, Mrs. Badenoch?
There will be quite a lot, but it will also be us stopping doing things. So it's not just yes.
You don't have a number, just quite a lot.
What we said? No, we said we're going back to 2016 levels. That's the number.
Well, what was the staffing in 2016? What's the difference in number from 2025 from 2016?
I don't have the figures right in front of me, but we did look at this. The figures have ballooned, and I know that we don't need not just the number of civil servants, but the amount of activity that we're carrying out. I'll get the figures sent to you. I don't have it just off the top of my head. But we have spent a lot of time.
But these are people's jobs, of course.
I'm not the one. I have a yes. Yes, they are.
So you're laying waste to people's jobs, but you don't know how many, Mrs. Badenoch. It does seem it's a rather bad look, isn't it?
Well, No, it isn't. And let's be very clear, Nick. If a job should not exist, then it isn't really a job.
The job should not exist. It's not really a job. Try telling that to the, I don't know, however many tens of thousands of people that you're going to just swingingly cut, which, okay, jobs may have ballooned since pandemic. I don't know the figures. Please tell me, Kemi Badenoch, what the figures are so we can actually have a sensible conversation about this. But she's not prepped. And this is a criticism. So it sounds like because I'm not a fan of the Tories, I'm just going to go to town on them. But actually, no, one of the criticisms that have come not only from the opposition, but from supposedly her own aides and people around her, is that she doesn't prep, right? She doesn't take briefings. It seems to be a running thing in the world at the moment. You've got Donald Trump not doing it, or Kemi Badenoch not doing it. So she actually is quite often unprepared. She seems unprepared when she's in the Prime Minister's questions, which happens once a week when they're against each other in the House of Commons, if you remember seeing that. She's just not very prepared. And here's an example. If you want to be Prime Minister of the nation, you need to be way more prepared. You're saying you are going to make huge cuts to the government. Okay, just at least have a figure of how many people. Surely that's you've war gamed this. But no. But anyway, she then just falls apart. And I think that interaction there. And this is then leading people to think, right, yeah, you can't lead the Conservative Party. So at the moment, she's got, from the survey, I think that was done at the conference, she's got a minimum of support. And I think Robert Jenrick is more popular. You've got people giving speeches. I think this might have been the Shadow Chancellor giving a speech where literally is no one there. There's hardly anyone there. I mean, this... even at Labour conference, I know they are in power, but it was absolutely packed to the rafters. I know that was for Starmer's speech, but this is a much smaller venue, and it's very sparsely filled. And actually, I've seen plenty of images of the whole conference being very thin on the ground. And so then Kemi Badenoch here was on BBC News getting questioned about this and trying to deny it, and then they're like, "But we're literally showing pictures of it now."
Is 7:38 exactly? We can see that behind you it's very quiet. How concerned are you that at the peak of the day, during the big speeches, the hall seems half empty? There doesn't seem to be much atmosphere, and you are simply not filling the seats in that slightly smaller hall that you're using at the moment the way that you used to.
That's simply not true. First of all,
sorry, I should just point out we're showing pictures of an empty hall right now.
I love that. It's simply not true. No, we are literally showing the audience this immediate reaction to say fake news. It's fake news. It's like, no, it's not. Just admit it, own it.
That you're using at the moment the way that you used to.
That's simply not true. First of all,
sorry, I should just point out we're showing pictures of an empty hall right now. Alongside you,
yes, but
we can see pictures of rows of empty seats.
Show the pictures of my speech. It was standing room only.
We've got Mel Stride's speech on at the moment.
We have this many times at conference, and I'm sorry I can't hear you because.
Okay, so it's a bit annoying because there's a delay on the line there, but that was the Shadow Chancellor, the Shadow, Treasury Secretary, if you like, in American terms. So, that should be a well-attended speech, and there was nary a person there. So I think the Conservatives are in serious trouble here, and I don't think their policies are particularly going to set the world alight here. They are going to be very unpopular with anyone centre right and to the left, and they are merely going to be popular for reform, but people that are going to reform are going to go to reform. They're not 14 years of Conservatives. If Conservatives are going to be reform light or reform 2.0, then I think you're going to struggle to differentiate yourself. And then it gets even worse. And this is bad for reform as well. They're going to need to work this out. So with all the defections from the Conservatives to reform, the Reform Party are looking like they are Conservative 2.0. So they're filling their ranks with defecting Conservatives. When you have a disaffected electorate who said, we are pissed off with 14 years of Conservative rule, so that's why we went to Labour, they're not going to want to go back to the Conservatives, particularly soon. And so Reform have a PR exercise, and they know this. I've read some analysts on this. They are aware that they're starting to look like the Conservative 2.0. So the question is, how are the Conservatives going to deal with reform? Because yes, they're trying to deal with Labour. Labour are ruling, and Conservatives would argue they're doing a poor job, and so you'd expect them to be taking pot shots at the Labour Party. But actually, the Conservatives aren't going to be taking a huge amounts of votes off Labour. Yeah, you do fight over the centre ground, but Labour are going to be decimated by the Greens, by your party if that picks up, Jeremy Corbyn and his splinter group, if you like, and by the Lib Dems, right? So if I was Kemi Badenoch or the Conservatives, I'd be like, let's leave these guys to attack each other. We need to deal with reform. So the Conservatives need to go to town on attacking reform unless they're going to join with reform. It's one or the other. They can't just try and be reform, and then it's very difficult to attack reform on policy. So what they need to do is attack reform on things like the association with Russia, which I have seen a little bit of, but I think they need to go to town on that. And as well, like, I think there are investigations now going on with funding for reform, like more formal investigations are starting to take place. And I think that would, for both parties, for Labour and for the Conservatives, I think that is a very meaningful route to take. But there needs to be some kind of differentiation. Otherwise, just give up on differentiating and just join. But if you are going to stay as Conservatives, you need to think up how you're going to attack reform, because you are losing not only your candidates to reform, but you're losing your voters, the electorate. Robert Jenrick, he's the guy that I expect to be running the Conservative Party fairly soon. He has got into trouble for talking about a whole community just being predominantly white. Didn't see any predominantly non-white. Didn't see any white faces when he's going around. Was it Handsworth in Birmingham? Now I think it was slightly taken out of context. He said there needs to be more integration. That was his point, and it was just kind of seen as quite, people are relaying that as a kind of a racist positioning. But seeing the words, the whole of the speech, what he's saying, I don't think that's the case. But he is saying, like, I've just seen a whole bunch of news segments and things he's done, his own videos and a segment he did for GB News that were really quite, he's certainly going down the right-wing populist pathway, that is for sure. So I think Robert Jenrick, kind of like Badenoch, is looking to become a conservative Nigel Farage, right? To take the party in that direction. But again, what is your differentiating? What is your unique, your USP, your unique sales point?
An unbiased mediator.
Okay, you've also got Jenrick talking in very MAGA terms about kind of attacking the judiciary, which I think is very worrying. Now, this is over the border. So this is to say that, we have these immigration lawyers who are connected to Open Borders charities. And I've looked into this, and there's 30 of them or something like this. But is very much putting the judiciary on the chopping block here, which is I am uncomfortable with, because I think this is a very kind of populist, almost authoritarian way to go, which is to attack the independent judiciary.
That is what a judge should be. And that is what the vast majority of judges in our legal system do. They wear the wig, they respect and revere it. And that is why, in turn, our legal system is respected and revered all around the world. But we've got a problem. Conference, we have a problem. It's one that Labour choose to ignore. Today...
So then he goes on to talk about immigration judges and whatnot. So they're going really hard on anti-immigration, and it is basically, anti-immigration, anti-environment, pro-business corporations, low tax, cut the welfare, cut the government. I failed to see a huge amount of difference between them and the Reform UK party. However, there is a difference that at least one person has talked about. So Chris Philp, who's a shadow cabinet member, has talked about how, I think it's Philp, talked about how Reform UK are socialists. And this is an interesting tack, whereby he has said, you look at some, and there is some truth to this. I wouldn't say that they're at all socialist in any way, shape or form, but there are, because of the nature of where Reform have taken some of their votes from, i.e. the working class left of who would have traditionally voted for Labour, and this has been the case since 2016 and Brexit. A lot of these Brexit voters were the working class, and they still like welfare. They still like nationalised industries. They might have come from families that were originally unionised families and so on and so forth. They like the NHS, and so Nigel Farage has a challenge when it comes to, well, if we try and privatise the NHS and turn it into an insurance-based system like the US, that's going to be deeply unpopular. And if we go down everything should be privatised, including steel and rail and this and that, then actually a lot of our voters don't really go with that. So some of if you looked at their 2024 manifesto, their last manifesto, it was a little bit all over the place, where they were actually doing some classically like left-wing economic. They included some left-wing economic policies in there, as well as their faux libertarian, far right-wing populist pitch, and I think that mix, which to be fair is understandable for Reform, I think they're going to need to do that to have this kind of broad base that they do have. I say broad base, I think largely a working class base often, but not entirely. I think they're going to need to do that, but that is something that Conservatives could pick on to differentiate themselves from Reform, possibly. And it's interesting that I think Chris Philp was doing that. So there's a lot of people talking about Robert Jenrick, and I think essentially you're going to see him take over the Conservative Party. That would be my prediction. Interesting to see good old Tony Abbott here, the former Australian Conservative or Liberal Party, isn't it, in Australia, leader at the Conservative Party conference. And my goodness, this is a bonkers answer that he gave to Channel 4 News, BBC News here, in the context of immigration and what to do with, how do you deport people, where do you deport them to?
Around Australia, it's not like the English Channel where there are basically no international waters.
That's correct, but you could certainly pick up people in the English Channel, hold them on some kind of a mothership, and send them back to the land from which they've come on some quiet and moonless night. And I think there are all sorts of things that a determined government could do to absolutely stop these boats.
Around us.
That is absolutely bonkers. And isn't it incredible that the Prime Minister of another country, the best idea he can come up with, this is why the issue of the deportation is a really problematic one, and why Kemi Badenoch does need a proper answer to this. Like, you may like the strong rhetoric that she's going to send back 150,000 illegal immigrants a year, right? Okay, brilliant. That sounds great. Yeah, fine. But there are no international waters. From our waters go to the French waters, I presume. And if they come from France, then they're our neighbours, and just sending them back to there, we need agreements in order to do that. He's saying, take people from their dinghies in the middle of the sea, put them on a mothership, and then on a quiet and moonless night, take them back to the country from whence they came. What, France? So we're just going to just invade France overnight and then just offload 1,000 illegal immigrants? Or like, do we work out where they all came from? You came from Mali, so we had to sail around to Mali and just on a quiet moonless night just drop them off in Mali. What are you talking about? So the fact that someone who's formerly a prime minister, who's strong on immigration himself, and that's the best he can come up with, means that this is a fairly not intractable problem, but it needs some serious thought, and we need to work well. Now, it's really interesting. I watched a video yesterday on the success of the EU in getting non-regular migration down by 20% due to the work they're doing with places like Libya and Turkey and a number of countries where they're sorting out agreements whereby these countries on behalf of the EU are stopping people before they try and go to the EU, and there are arrangements going on there. We would need to do things like this. So, like, we need to work with France. Which is what Keir Starmer's gone and done. He's tried to break up the gangs and have arrangements with France and Germany, etc., etc. But that's the sort of approach you would need to have, rather than these very bombastic claims of 150,000 illegal immigrants. I always think it's dangerous putting a number on things so far out as well, because I think it's just pie in the sky. But 150,000 illegal immigrants are going to be deported a year, but I'm not going to tell you how I'm going to do it. And, all you're doing is you're appealing to the sort of people that say we should stand on the beaches, underneath the cliffs of Dover and just shoot immigrants in their dinghies and that kind of thing. It's like, right, no, I think we need to be a little bit more humane, compassionate and sensible and practical than that. So, the end result is, I think the Conservative Party conference was something of a damp squib. I don't think you're going to get anything remotely looking like excitement coming out of that from people outside of a very small niche. And that's incredible, considering this is it should be an absolutely huge political party, and it should have half the country, essentially, or at least like 30% of the country getting somewhat excited by this, or at least, you're never going to have people getting excited by party political conferences, but I don't think you're even seeing the excitement within the political establishment. I don't think they've got enough MPs and people wanting to be MPs, and councillors are defecting. MPs are thinking about defecting. One of their kind of shadow cabinet MPs, Danny Kruger, just defected the other week. So the Conservatives are in trouble. This is an existential crisis for them, and there was nothing in that conference that spoke to me as someone looking on, and when I'm not trying to be critical of the Tories from an ideological point of view, that if I was a Conservative voter, there would be nothing there that really excited me in terms of the people I'm hearing and the charisma and the personalities there. There are some somewhat typical Conservative ideals, but I think they're taking them to the extreme. Like, if you think about things like the European Convention of Human Rights, then that is something that I think Churchill and Conservatives have been, involved in creating, and then very much behind for forever and a day. And that's why you're starting to see sort of kind of Thatcherite Conservatives start to criticize the Conservatives on account of trying to take themselves out the ECHR, which will play merry havoc with things like the Good Friday Agreement and Northern Ireland peace, as well as with our European neighbours, and we'd have to come out of the Council of Europe, and so on and so forth, which is not to do with the EU. So this is, I think, an inflection point it's not really an inflection point. I think the inflection point was the election. But this isn't going to, I don't think, reverse any of the decline of the Conservative Party at the moment. I just don't see that happening. And you go back to these polls, and I think everyone's going to be trying to fight off reform. Reform may well, struggle to get hugely above where they are at the moment. I mean, it's incredible that they're there, but I think 4 years is a long time to the next election, and a lot will happen then. And I think all of these parties are going to be coming up with a strategy to defeat reform. Reform are essentially going to have to fight every other party in a way that, say, the Lib Dems won't, and the Greens won't really. Like, the Greens and Lib Dems are going to be sort of left to their own devices, but everyone's going to be picking on reform, right? Labour's going to be struggling. Conservatives are going to be struggling. Labour's future will depend on the growth of the economy. The Conservative Party's future will depend on reform. And then the Lib Dems will pick up the pieces for the disenfranchised and disenchanted centre. Greens will pick up the same, but on the left. And we have the most sort of multipolar political system now, or political landscape now, than we've ever had. And if the Conservatives merge with Reform, then they've got a pretty solid right-wing, unified right-wing. And I could see why they would definitely want to do that. But I think that would essentially be the death of the Conservative Party as we know it, and it'd be some kind of new amalgamation. Anyway, let me know what you think. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.